RealAgriculture.com's coverage of Canada's Outdoor Farm Show 2012 is brought to you by Pride Seeds, High Stick NT, and Soybeanschool.com.
Okay, so we are here with Christine Brown with OMAFRA. We are going to talk about cover crops.
So the intent with the cover crop demonstration is that we're trying to show 30% residue cover is possible every time of the year. And so cover crops is a part of that living residue cover. So what we've done here is we've planted a lot of the common cover crops for Ontario and then a couple of less common cover crops, and just showed what it would look like when it's planted at approximately the right time or at the right seeding rate. So we're starting here with oats. Oats is a very common cover crop. I guess oats and oilseed radish would probably be the most common. It's a really good fit for where there's some manure to be applied after wheat harvest, and it will help to take up some of that nitrogen and hold it in green form. This year, I think there's a lot of dairy farmers that are hoping to be able to harvest that oats so that they can make oatlage, still have some root biomass that they're producing, but they won't have to worry about the biomass on top. There's a lot of different reasons for cover crops, and so we don't have any red clover in this mix. Red clover is still probably the most common cover crop. There's a lot of difficulty getting a uniform stand, so that's one of the reasons people are looking for options. But for people that are looking for a nitrogen contribution for next year's crop, red clover is still the number one. Oats will take up that nitrogen. You won't see it in next year's corn crop the same way that you do with red clover. So the next cover crop we've got here is cereal rye. The biggest difference between the cereal rye and the red clover is the ground cover. With the cereal rye, you get a lot more density. You get it's almost like it moves a lot more over the soil, where oats is more like a bunch grass. So for keeping weeds out, your cereal rye is going to do a better job than your oats. It depends a little bit on the seeding rate. Here, the seeding rate is 120 kilograms per hectare. That would be the rate that's recommended in our publications. People can decide whether that's too heavy or too light. It would be a lighter rate if you were mixing it with some of the other cover crops. The next cover crop is annual rye. Annual rye and cereal rye are often confused with each other. The annual rye usually doesn't survive the winter. Here it's planted at 16 kilograms per hectare. It looks very thick. It has a lot of spring growth, a lot of fall growth. It doesn't have the greatest midsummer growth. It doesn't like the heat so well. We seem to not have as good luck with annual ryegrass as they do in the States. In the States, they just love this one. It's one of the main cover crops. I think it's variety related. But it is one that we're just looking at. It's a very popular mix in forage crops, and so for quality and for grazing, it would make an excellent cover crop, an excellent choice. Sorghum Sudan grass is another. It's more of a warm season grass, so it's one that would be planted if you had a pea crop that came off and you were looking for some cover, or if you took off an early, let's say your hay winter killed and you wanted some more forage. It does give a good cover. It's also one that can be planted when the wheat comes off early and you want something to cover. Again, it's one that will utilize manure if manure's been applied. If it gets cut before it goes into boot stage or heading stage, then it will regrow again, and so then you've got a more constant cover. It will winter kill. It grows a lot more slowly once the temperatures cool off. So red clover, we do have some here that was planted after, it would be simulating after wheat harvest. It was planted July the 13th, 9 kilograms per hectare. It was planted when the conditions were pretty dry, and so you can see that there's a lot of competition with the weeds. This would be, I think this year, pretty typical of what red clover looks like even after wheat harvest. Crimson clover It's another legume. People are trying it to see if there's a more uniform stand that they can get after wheat. It's not as popular as red clover. I think we're learning more about some of the varieties. So far it hasn't survived winter very well. It is a fast-growing clover, and it does give you some of that same nitrogen uptake benefit, or some of that same nitrogen contribution as you get with the red clover. Hairy vetch. Hairy vetch is one that's very popular in the States. Again, it's a legume. We keep hearing stories that it can contribute as much as 200 kilograms of nitrogen. We don't see that in the trials that we've done. One of the things with the hairy vetch is once it starts growing, it grows really well, but when it starts off its growth, you get a lot of these fine stems, and they don't cover a lot of the ground, so there's a lot of competition in the early stages for some of the weeds. As the density increases, it will choke out some of the weeds. There are weeds like lamb's quarters and pigweed that will get through. It's one that I think we're going to see more of as we try different applications. Peas. Peas is one that people like for forages and for mixes. It's not the most popular one. We don't get the nitrogen contribution that we would with red clover. It was planted when it was dry. It was broadcast, and so what you see is inconsistent stand, quite typical of what you would get with broadcast, just because the seeds are big. When it's dry, it takes a little bit more to get them going. Some people like it. It's, for most cases, not one that you would plant by itself. It's good with a mix of oats or another cereal. Soybeans as a cover crop, not that common, but it is an opportunity where people have an early wheat harvest and they plant the soybeans, it turns dry, they don't get much of a stand until it starts raining, and then it grows, but it's not going to get mature, it's not going to produce a seed crop. It does give good cover. If people have seed that's been treated and they can't use it for other purposes, they can use it as a cover crop. It does give that cover. Probably still not as good as a red clover crop. Buckwheat. Buckwheat is a common cover crop if it's, for example, last year when it was wet and it was wet and it was wet and it was too late to almost plant anything else. Buckwheat, bees love it for honey production. It's quite common in organic agriculture. It suppresses weeds better than a lot of other cover crops, not perfectly. Here it was planted at 60 kilograms per hectare, but again, because it was dry, it just didn't take off as quickly as it could have or should have. It's also a common cover crop later in the season. The risk with it is if you plant it at the wrong time and you get it to go into bloom and into seed production, and if it doesn't get clipped right away, then it becomes a seed problem for a whole bunch of years. So that's the risk with it. Phacelia, also called scorpion weed. We planted it here. We obviously planted it a little bit too late because all you see is just tiny little they're just starting to emerge. This is what it looks like when it's bigger. Again, it's one that we're not that familiar with. We're just trying it out. It's a broadleaf. The benefit of this cover crop of Phacelia is that it's not related. It's not in the same family as any of the other crops that we grow. So if you're trying to break any disease cycles, that's where this one has a lot of merit. It's also very attractive to bees and to pollinators. So if you've got it in a small location, it does help to enhance pollination. Seed is expensive. That's probably going to limit how much we see other than just small plots.